So, as you and I discussed earlier today, this idea isn't exactly foreign to Qualcomm. What we want to know, get a better idea of from you, is whether Barry Rosenstein, who has had a pretty successful track run as an activist, is going to be successful with Qualcomm.
Well, what he's asking the company to do is something the company already said was a good idea. Back in 2000, Qualcomm positioned the exact same idea, that they should split their business into the chip-making unit and the technology licensing business. The unit that had 20% gross margins and the unit that is looking at better than 80% gross margins. And that the market might value these very differently. They proposed doing it in a tax-free spin-off of the technology licensing business to investors. The problem is that business now is a much larger portion of the profits of the business, and the tax-free benefits may be harder to come by. And what I'll also say is that the beneficiaries of this would be the shareholders, which is to say that the management and the founders of the company, the Jacobs family, would indeed financially benefit from this tremendously if, in fact, the market did take this at a better price when they look at the two businesses.
Alastair, you're a political analyst. I won't presume that you have a view on Qualcomm, but activism is something that none of us can ignore these days.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for it. And I'm going to give you a very specific example, Erik. Cyber attack. Now, I have nothing against Sony at all. I think they're a very, very fine company. But actually, in a way, I'm quite happy about what happened last year with Sony. Not because I wish Sony any harm, but because it has brought this topic very much to the fore. And what I would like to see, and what I think I am going to see, is more institutional investors going activist on the question of what is your corporate doing to protect yourself against cyber attack.
Because you know that Sony was targeted by an activist investor, Dan Loeb, who, so far as I know, and I'm only saying so far as I know, didn't ask that question, wasn't pressing Sony for more information about its cyber preparedness. Dan Loeb wanted it to spin off Sony Entertainment.
Yeah. And I think this is a really big question. The risks out there are much, much bigger than a lot of people realize. A lot of cyber attacking is going on all the time. Firms are not declaring it. I think it would be a very good thing if the EU and the US Congress were to pass legislation saying, if you are hacked, you have to declare it. I think shareholders have a right to know what defenses are being put up against this increasingly serious cyber threat, and exactly if you've been hacked or not. Now, Nomura, we have a big conference going on in Asia at the beginning of June. We're bringing in a top cyber expert to come and talk to our investors about the risks and how you counter them. This is a very 21st century threat. Investors need to be more aware of it.
I want to bring Cory into this conversation. Cory, or at least back in. Cory, you talk to investors and you study activists. Do you think there's a role for activists to play in this debate over cyber terrorism, or at least cyber attacks? And the reason I ask is because activists are constantly trying to sell you on where the value is in the stocks that's not being recognized. They rarely talk about the potential for downside if company X, Y, or Z or such and such a CEO doesn't do something.
Well, and I think there's actually, real quick, just a risk that investors take when they're doing the great work that activists do, which is say, hey, how come your costs are higher? Well, one of the reasons some costs are higher might be that they're actually devoting a lot of money to protecting themselves from cyber attacks.
That's true.
We know that as the conversation's moved from the sideline to the boardroom, but I don't think it's moved from the boardroom to the executive offices of the hedge funds that are trying to find value in these companies.